Carmine John Persico Jr., nicknamed Junior, or the Snake, was an American mobster and the longtime boss of the Colombo crime family in New York City from 1973 until his death in 2019. He had been serving 32 years in federal prison from 1987 until his death on March 7, 2019. Carmine Persico was born in Brooklyn, New York. His father was a legal stenographer for several law firms in Manhattan. His brothers Theodore Persico and Alphonse Aliboy Persico also became capo regimes in the Colombo crime family. His son, named Alphonse after the boy's uncle and commonly known as Little Aliboy, eventually became a capo as well. The family lived in the Carroll Gardens and Red Hook sections of Brooklyn. Persico dropped out of high school at age 16. By then he was a leader of the Garfield Boys, a Brooklyn street gang. However, one contemporary source says that in 1950 he had actually belonged to the South Brooklyn Boys, a successor gang to the Garfield Boys. In March 1951, 17-year-old Persico was arrested on charges of fatally beating another youth in Brooklyn's Prospect Park. However, all charges were eventually dropped. In the early 50s, Persico was recruited into the Profaci crime family, the forerunner of the Colombo family, by longtime capo Frank Abbatemarco. At first, Persico did bookmaking and loan sharking, then moved into burglaries and hijackings. During this decade, he was arrested over 12 times but spent only a few days in jail. He also started working with Joe Gallo and his brothers, Albert and Lawrence. In 1957, Persico allegedly participated in the murder of Albert Anastasia, the leader of Murder Inc., and the boss of what was then the Anastasia family. Anastasia's underboss, Carlo Gambino, wanted control of the family and conspired with his allies, Genovese family boss Vito Genovese and Profaci family boss Joe Profaci, to kill Anastasia. Profaci allegedly gave the job to Persico and the Gallo brothers. On October 25, 1957, Anastasia entered the barbershop of the Park Sheraton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. As he relaxed in the barber chair, two men, with scars covering their face, rushed in and shoved the barber out of the way and fired at Anastasia. After the first volley of bullets, Anastasia allegedly lunged at his killers. However, the stunned Anastasia had actually attacked the gunman's reflections in the wall mirror of the barbershop. The gunman continued firing, finally killing Anastasia. No one was ever charged in the Anastasia killings, and there's an alternative theory that gunmen from the Patriarcha crime family of New England performed the hit. By the late 50s, Persico and the Gallos were becoming increasingly dissatisfied with Profaci's leadership. Profaci demanded high tribute payments from the family members and was viewed as a wealthy autocrat. The first Colombo War started on November 4, 1959, when Profaci's gunmen murdered Abbatemarco on a Brooklyn street. Abbatemarco had stopped paying tribute to Profaci earlier that year with the support of the Gallo faction. It is speculated that Carlo Gambino and Lucchese family boss Tommy Lucchese were encouraging the Gallos to challenge Profaci, their enemy. When Profaci took Abbatemarco's lucrative rackets away from the Gallos, the warfare began. On February 27, 1961, the Gallos, led by Joe Gallo, kidnapped four of Profaci's top men. Profaci himself eluded capture and flew to sanctuary in Florida. While holding the hostages, Larry and Albert sent Joe Gallo to California. Profaci's consigliere, Charles the Sige Lucicero, negotiated with the Gallos and all of the hostages were released peacefully. However, Profaci had no intention of honoring this peace agreement. On August 20th, 1961, Joseph Profaci ordered the murder of Gallo members Joe Jelly and Larry Gallo. Gunmen allegedly murdered Joe Jelly after inviting him to go deep-sea fishing. Gallo survived a strangulation attempt in the Sahara Club of East Flatbush by Persico and Salvatore D'Ambrosio after a police officer intervened. The Gallos then began calling Persico the Snake. He had betrayed them. The war continued, resulting in 9 murders and 3 disappearances. Persico was indicted later that year for the attempted murder of Gallo, but the charges were dropped when Gallo refused to testify. On June 6, 1962, Profaci died of cancer and Magliocco became the new family boss. However, the war with the Gallo faction continued. In early 1963, Persico survived a car bombing and his enforcer, Hugh McIntosh, was shot in the groin as he attempted to kill Larry Gallo. On May 19, 1963, Gallo gunmen ambushed Persico in the Gowanus section of Brooklyn. A panel truck pulled alongside Persico's car and 2 men shot him in the face, hand, and shoulder. Persico reportedly spat out the bullet that had entered his face. Soon after the attempt on his life, Persico was in prison on extortion charges. By the fall of 1963, with Joe Gallo also imprisoned, the shooting war had ended with Magliocco the winner. In late 1963, after an unsuccessful attempt to take over the commission, Magliocco was forced into retirement. He was replaced by Colombo, who had alerted the commission to Magliocco's plot. The Profaci crime family was now the Colombo crime family. In turn, Colombo rewarded the imprisoned Persico by naming him a capo. After being promoted to capo, Persico was constantly on the streets. He was involved in labor racketeering, extortion, loan sharking, hijacking, illegal gambling, and murder for hire. By the late 60s, Persico's crew was one of the most profitable in the Colombo family. In 1968, Persico was convicted on federal hijacking charges after 5 separate trials dating back to 1960. On January 27, 1972, he was finally sent to prison on these charges, where he would spend 8 years. The trial was noted for the only appearance of former mobster Joseph Valachi as a prosecution witness. In February 1971, Joey Gallo was released from prison. On June 28th, Colombo was shot and severely wounded at the second annual Italian-American Civil Rights League rally in Manhattan. The shooter, a black ex-convict named Jerome Johnson, was immediately shot dead by Colombo's bodyguards. Colombo survived in a paralyzed state until his death on May 22, 1978. Police concluded that Johnson was the sole shooter. Both law enforcement and the Mafia assumed Gallo had organized the hit. He had built ties with black gangsters while in prison, and upon his release, threatened to start another war unless he received $100,000 in compensation. On November 11, 1971, Persico went on trial in state court on 37 counts of extortion, coercion, and conspiracy, all stemming from a loan sharking operation out of a Manhattan fur shop. On December 8th, a jury acquitted him of all charges. All 12 prosecution witnesses said they could not identify Persico. After the Colombo shooting, underboss Joseph Iacovelli assumed the role of acting boss. Looking for revenge, Albert Gallo sent a gunman from Las Vegas to the Neapolitan Noodle restaurant in Manhattan, where Iacovelli, Alphonse Persico, and Gennaro Langella were dining one day. However, the gunman did not recognize the mobsters and shot 4 innocent diners instead, killing 2 of them. After the assassination attempt, Iacovelli fled New York, leaving Persico as the new boss, with Persico himself coordinating the suppression of the gallows. On April 7, 1972, Joey Gallo was shot and killed by Persico gunmen as he was celebrating his birthday at Umberto's Clam House in Manhattan's Little Italy. In 1973, Persico was imprisoned on hijacking and loan sharking charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison. His incarceration coincided with the release of his brother, Alphonse, from 17 years in prison. Persico designated Alphonse as acting boss with support from underboss from Gennaro Langella and Carmine's older brother, Theodore. Langella supervised various labor rackets for the family, including their stake in the Concrete Club, and exerted control over various labor unions. In 1979, Persico was released from federal prison. On August 11, 1981, Persico pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges of attempting to bribe an IRS agent from 1977 to 1978 while in federal custody. The evidence included a recording of Persico offering the agent $250,000 in exchange for getting him an early release from prison. On November 9, 1981, Persico was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. On October 14, 1984, Persico and the rest of the Colombo family leadership were indicted on multiple racketeering charges as part of the Colombo trial. After the indictment was published, Persico went into hiding. On October 26, the FBI began a national manhunt for Persico and soon named him the 390th fugitive to be added to their 10 most wanted list. Persico hid in the home of his cousin, mob associate Fred DeChristopher, in Hampstead, New York. Unbeknownst to Persico, DeChristopher had been relaying information to the FBI for the previous 2 years after being caught up in a sting operation, and had already told the Bureau of Persico's whereabouts. The FBI concocted the fake manhunt to shield DeChristopher, who would later provide damning testimony against Persico as a key witness for the prosecution. Persico was arrested on February 15, 1985. On July 1st, Persico pleaded not guilty along with 11 other New York Mafia leaders after a previous indictment on a second set of racketeering charges as part of the Mafia Commission trial. Prosecutors aimed to strike at all the crime families at once, using their involvement in the commission. According to Colombo hitman and FBI informant Gregory Scarpa, Persico and Gambino boss John Gotti backed a plan to kill the lead prosecutor and future New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani in late 1986, but it was rejected by the rest of the commission. At the start of the commission trial, Persico decided to serve as his own lawyer. He believed that his history of convictions gave him sufficient experience to defend himself. His co-defendants vehemently disagreed with his decision, and the judge warned Persico that he would be waiving incompetent counsel as grounds for an appeal. Persico received counsel from lawyers to help guide him when the prosecutors questioned him. He tried to project a friendly image to the jury and urged them to put aside any preconceptions about the Mafia or Cosa Nostra. Many believe that Persico inadvertently sabotaged his own defense by acknowledging criminal activities during his cross-examinations of prosecution witnesses. On June 14, 1986, Persico was convicted of racketeering in the Colombo trial. On November 17th, he was sentenced to 39 years in prison. The sentencing judge, John F. Keenan, nonetheless praised Persico's performance as his own lawyer in the commission trial and said, quote, "Mr. Persico, you are a tragedy. You are one of the most intelligent people I've ever seen in my life." On November 19th, Persico and the other commission trial defendants were convicted on all charges. On January 13, 1987, Keenan sentenced Persico to 100 years in prison to run consecutively with his 39-year sentence in the Colombo trial, a $240,000 fine, and no option for parole. New York Times organized crime writer Selwyn Robb thought that the Colombos were the most damaged by the trial, even though most of the top leaders of New York Mafia families were sent to prison, with the Lucchese's losing their entire hierarchy. In his book, Five Families, Robb noted that Persico was only 53 years old at the time of the commission trial, making him by far the youngest boss in New York. However, Robb noted, Persico had already led the family for 14 years and was at the peak of his abilities. He believed Persico would have potentially had a long reign ahead of him had he not been taken off the streets. By comparison, the other bosses were in their 70s and would have likely passed the reins to men of Persico's generation even without the trial intervening. Persico was sent to the United States Penitentiary near Marion, Illinois to serve his combined 139-year sentence. Persico realized that he would likely die in prison and would thus never be able to resume active control of the family. He was, however, determined to ensure that his cut of the Colombo rackets continued to flow to his relatives. To that end, soon after he was sentenced, he named his brother, Alley Boy, as acting boss. Alley Boy did not reign long, however. He was arrested for loan sharking. Persico then named a three-man ruling panel to run the family. In 1988, he dissolved the panel and named Victor Little Vic Arena, a loyal capo from Brooklyn, as temporary acting boss. While giving Arena the power to induct members and order murders on his own authority, unusual for an acting boss, Persico made it clear that Arena was merely a placeholder until Persico's son, Little Alley Boy, was released from prison. Indeed, Persico picked Arena in part because he was the capo of Little Alley Boy's old crew. Knowing that Little Alley Boy would be 40 years old by the time he was paroled, Persico wanted to ensure that his son would be able to inherit the family's riches as soon as he was released. By 1991, Arena had become disgruntled with the current leadership scheme and was tired of the constant stream of orders that he was ordered from Persico in prison. He also grew to resent that he would have to turn over the family to Little Alley Boy. Gotti encouraged Arena's rebellion, since he and Persico had long been enemies, and went so far as to label Persico a rat, the worst possible accusation for a Cosa Nostra figure. In the spring of 1991, Arena made a push to become boss in his own right. He requested that consigliere Carmine quietly poll all the Colombo capos as to whom they wanted boss. Arena believed that if he had enough support from the capos, it would strengthen his argument that the commission should recognize Arena, not Persico, as a rightful leader of the family. However, Sessa instead told Persico about Arena's plot. Persico then allegedly ordered Sessa to lead a team to kill Arena. On June 20th, Sessa took a 5-man hit team and parked on the street close to Arena's residence on Long Island, waiting for his return home. As Arena drove down the street, he recognized the men in the car and quickly sped away. For the next several months, the Persico and Arena factions engaged in peace negotiations brokered by the Commission. Despite Persico's claim as the legitimate boss, the Commission refused to take sides in the Colombo conflict. On November 18, 1991, the Third Colombo War started when Arena Lieutenant William Cutolo sent a hit team to try and kill Scarpa, a Persico loyalist, in Brooklyn. By the end of 1991, the two Colombo factions had traded several successful murder attempts. Responding to public outrage over the carnage, law enforcement threw resources into prosecuting the Colombo mobsters, resulting in 68 indictments, 58 convictions, and 10 mobsters turning state's evidence. In December 1992, Arena was convicted of racketeering and murder and was sentenced to life in prison, dissolving his faction and leaving the Persicos in control once again. With the end of the war with Arena, Persico had set up another ruling structure for the family. Since Little Alley Boy was facing prosecution on new charges, Persico installed a ruling committee comprising of his brother, Theodore, mobster Joseph Badunza, and Joseph Tomasello. In 1994, when Andrew Russo was released from prison, Persico disbanded the committee and designated Russo as acting boss. In 1996, Russo went to prison and Persico replaced him with his son, Little Alley Boy, who by now had been released from prison. In early 1999, with Alphonse in legal trouble, Persico made Cacace the acting boss. However, later in 1991, either Carmine or Alphonse Persico ordered Cucciolo's murder. The recently released Alphonse was facing new federal charges that threatened to send him back to prison, and the Persicos were worried about Cucciolo seizing control of the family. On May 26, 1999, Alphonse ordered Cucciolo to meet him at a Brooklyn park. Cucciolo was then taken to a mob associate's apartment and murdered, and his body was buried in Long Island. Police would not recover the remains until November 2008. On December 20, 2001, Alphonse Persico pleaded guilty to the loan sharking charges, accepted a 13-year prison sentence, and agreed to forfeit $1 million. On October 14, 2004, he was indicted on federal racketeering charges, including conspiring to murder Cucciolo and Joe Campanella. No charges were filed against Carmine Persico. However, the Cucciolo murder trial ended in mistrial due to juror deadlock. In 2004, the government transferred Carmine Persico to the Federal Correctional Complex, Butner, a medium-security correctional facility in North Carolina. On December 28, 2007, in a second trial, Alphonse Persico and DeRosa were convicted of Cucciolo's murder. Like his father, Alphonse Persico was sentenced to life in prison. In March 2010, Reuters news agency reported that Carmine Persico had been socializing in prison with convicted swindler Bernie Madoff. The New York Post further reported that Persico loved to play pinochle and bocce with other mobsters and regale them with stories from his past. Persico's projected release date was March 20th, 2050, when he would have been 117 years old. Rob wrote in Five Families that Persico's attempts to protect his own position and ensure that his son succeeded him nearly destroyed the Colombo family. By Rob's estimate, Persico's deceitful schemes led directly to 70 of his fellow mobsters and associates being sent to prison, as well as 12 deaths. On March 7, 2019, Persico died at Duke University Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more of our Mafia TV series, please like and subscribe. Until next time, forget about it.